Hey guys, in this video we are going to cover a little bit of a more wholesome topic of the Cold War. We've talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs and Vietnam and the Korean War, which were all deadly and very devastating to America. But in this topic, the space race, we're going to cover some of the progress and the advancements that were made in American science, technology, engineering, and math. So the timeline of events that led into the space race begin in 1957 when Russia launched Sputnik 1. This was the first artificial satellite to go into orbit. And this was really inspiring to the U.S. because at this time Russia was our major rival for technology. And at this point, the U.S. didn't have NASA or any type of space program. So 1957, Russia launches Sputnik 1. And in response, in 1958, the United States creates NASA for the first time. And they begin to work on launching their own satellites. And late 1958, the U.S. launches its Explorer 1 satellite. Not to be outdone by that, the Russians in 1961 achieve another milestone. They send the first human into orbit, Yuri Gagarin, aboard Vostok 1, and he orbits Earth, which at this point is very far beyond the U.S.'s technology. So in 1962, JFK declares his ambitions where he says by the end of the decade, the U.S. is going to send a human to the moon. And that's a huge statement to do when we haven't even sent a human into space, into orbit at that point. So there were some setbacks. We're not going to cover all the setbacks, but for example, in 1967, the U.S. lost Apollo 1 due to fire and lost 3 of its astronauts. But thankfully, by 1969, the United States successfully lands and launches Apollo 11 to the moon. Neil Armstrong becomes the first person to walk on the surface of the moon, which makes it a significant victory for the U.S. in the space race. And after the moon landing, things die down as far as missions into outer space and the competition with the Russians, because the U.S. declares victory at that point, saying, "Oh, we've won. We've landed on the moon, even though we didn't get into space first or orbit the Earth first. We're calling the space race at this point. We've landed on the moon." And then finally, in 1975, the symbolic end comes when the U.S. and the Soviet Union launch a joint rocket into space to dock into orbit. This is collaborative, where the U.S. astronauts and the Russian cosmonauts go and visit each other's space vessels, and peace is had. There's no longer conflict in the sense that they're aggressive towards each other. They're starting to work together. And then one of the conclusions of the space race after that is that the U.S. and the Russians work together on the International Space Station. So that shows that there's goodwill between the two countries. They're willing to put aside their tensions in government in order to achieve collaboration in math and science and astronomy and all of that. So the major conclusions of the space race is that there have been significant advances in science and technology, especially in material sciences and like the metals and the materials that are needed to go into space, and then also the telecommunication and computer technology needed to launch and control satellites in outer space. There's also profound cultural impacts, because starting in the 60s and even continuing until today, there's a very high priority placed on math and science skills. There's a lot of great jobs now that have been created for that, and there's sort of a glorification of those skills. Not to like play favorites or anything, but like if you compare how our economy treats like an art history degree versus a STEM degree, you'll notice there's a much higher reward per capita placed on those STEM degrees. So not to say you can't make it in the arts, but there's definitely an edge in terms of like scholarships and job opportunities in these fields based because of the space race. Also, the competition fostered a spirit of inquiry and ambition. It made people believe that, hey, nothing's impossible. If we can land on the moon, we can do anything. If we can launch a rocket into orbit, we as a human race can do anything. And so it was very inspirational in terms of ambition and inquiry. And also it eased the tensions of the Cold War. And maybe this was the thing that kept it from being a hot war where we could collaborate in science and we could collaborate in the space race. So I hope this video is informative and it helps you guys better understand the role that the space race played in the Cold War. Thank you.